Hey trainers, and welcome to Soundproof/Future Sight Worlds Edition of Future Sight. We're back about a one week late because one member of the team here was actually in London for the World Championships. Go figure. I wonder which one of us that could have been.
There we go.
And one of
I'm
us
really
had
bad at pointing in a mirror, apparently.
Well, one of us had the misfortune of being in the United States of America during that time. But anyway, my name is Brendan. I go by Mr. BDog46 online, and I'm joined by my good friend Jake, who goes by Major Bowman online. And if you couldn't figure it out by now, he was at Worlds this past week. And we're going to be pulling one of those matches from the aforementioned World Championships that Jake was at to talk about this week.
Yeah, I was watching most of Worlds live, and it was so much fun. I missed that. That's another story. That's a different topic. Moral of that story is go to Worlds if you can, even if you're not playing. It's great. But I was in the stands watching this match, and as soon as it finished, I messaged Brendan, and I said, we're doing this for Future Sight.
Yeah.
And because we knew we wanted to do one from Worlds, but this one was so fun to watch. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, if you were watching Worlds on the stream or in person, I think this was the most hype match, or like the most, I don't know, the closest match, the most fun one to watch. Whatever descriptor you want to use, easily my favorite.
Yeah, and I think the other thing about this match is we've been pretty excited over the past couple weeks, or couple months at this point, as we've done quite a few bi-weekly episodes, is to show you matches that have been, representative of what the meta was at the time. And I feel like this match really captures that as well, which is why we're also kind of excited to bring it to you.
Yeah. So without further ado,
so we're gonna throw it up on screen, and as you can see, immediately we've got on the one hand two of the preeminent Japanese players in the world. I don't think that's really up for debate. Which is on the left side is Shohei Kimura, who is Zine is a very popular Japanese player, somebody who, unlike a lot of Japanese players, likes to participate in a lot of the American tournaments, including some of the team tournaments. And you've probably, if you follow some of the American team tournaments, have seen him go for an obscene amount of money in NPA pretty much every single year that he signs up. And then Naoto Mizubuchi, who is a name that pretty much precedes itself at this point, Jake.
Yeah, he was the defending world champion. He won in 2019 with a kind of similar team. He also had Lunala Groudon.
Right.
And then the rest of the team filled out with the more relevant meta techs. But the story with Naoto this tournament was really cool because in 2019 on day 2, he started at 0-2 and went out to make cut. And in 2022, he started day 2, 0-2, and is now 1 win away from cut. This is round 7 of 7 on day 2. Right. So either of these players make top cut if they win, or eliminated if they lose. And so that made it a really tense match just from those stakes alone. And on top of that, the story with Naoto. And I think it was really fun to watch, given that storyline as well, just because it would have been so cool. I was rooting for him really hard. I really wanted Naoto to win. Right. And spoiler, he did not win Worlds. You probably know that. But it would have been so cool for that to be like that. What kind of storyline would that be? We've never had that before. Probably won't ever again. For that identical of a run, just would have been great with a similar team too.
And I think that just being a repeat Worlds winner alone is kind of a compelling argument in its own right. In that we haven't had one of those since Ray Rizzo, and his most recent World Championship was over a decade ago at this point. Just over a decade ago, given that Worlds was
a decade and a week.
but it counts, right? Is that we have a lot of conversations, and I guess a lot of results that happened this week going down the stretch, or this year going down the stretch, also call into conversation who the VGC GOAT is, right? And a repeat World Championship definitely sends you on your way. Yeah. But anyway, that's kind of where we're at as far as storylines, and then talking about the teams, as we always do, is if you're familiar with VGC 2022, I think we're in Series 12, if I'm correct.
Yeah.
You're going to see familiar-looking Pokemon and familiar-looking archetypes as well. And over to the left on Zene's side, you're going to see a pretty standard 5, and then fill in your own Prankster user as the 6th Pokemon.
I mean, yeah, that's a pretty good way to describe it. I've seen that 5 a lot, the first 5 there, minus the Whimsicott. And then there are so many things you can do with that slot. I know Whimsicott's a fine choice there, Grimmsnarl's good. It's hard to go wrong if you just throw some kind of supportive Pokemon there, because when you have Zasha and Ogre Thundurus, that's all the firepower you're going to need for the most part. And so Incineroar, Rillaboom are there to support them, patch some matchups. But like specifically Gastrodon, that Rillaboom is there for Gastrodon, among other things. And a Whimsicott also helps with that, so that's a nice reason to include it. But yeah, those 3 are just very, very strong. Definitely.
And then over on the right side on Naoto's team, you're going to find something that looks very similar to what became known as Rinya-Sun, with the exception of one restricted Pokemon in which the Zacian that typically fills its spot was replaced by a Lunala.
Yeah, Rinya was actually at Worlds too, and I think he made like top 16 or something, either 16 or 8. So that was also a really fun story, using that Rinya-Sun team that he was popular for. But I think this is a fine choice too. Like, again, if you just take the 5, the Groudon, Grimmsnarl, Incineroar, Charizard, Gastrodon, and replace the Zacian with Lunala, that's what... Why did I say that? That's what we just said. That's literally the same.
That is exactly what I just said.
I know. But Lunala like serves a different purpose. You have a Trick Room option, which is really nice because the Rinya-Sun team doesn't. And getting like Groudon, Gastrodon, and Trick Room can be really nice. The like meta development of the month for Worlds was max
the
HP
weakness policy.
Yeah,
yes,
max HP weakness policy
that.
Charizard, which was really, really cool. Like if you had told me a year ago that weakness policy Charizard would be making a deep Worlds run, I would have laughed in your face, like for a couple minutes probably.
Right.
But every single Charizard I saw on stream was either max HP or like 1 or 2 off, and they were all weakness policy, and it makes a lot of sense. Because there are very few Rock-type moves in the meta other than on Charizard themselves when they're running Ancient Power.
Right.
And stuff like Max Geyser from Kyogre or any of its water moves without a max aren't really going to leave a huge dent if the sun is up. And so if you are able to like force the Kyogre to water move you in the sun, you're getting +2 Airstreams, +2 Wildfire, etc. Same thing with electric moves. I don't know if you ever want to be taking something from Regieleki, but on the off chance you have to, that's there. And Thunder Kyogre. There's just so many things you can do with weakness policy that make Charizard a little bit more disgusting to play against.
Yeah, definitely. And I think Thundurus is one of the big things
Yes.
as well.
Yeah.
That and you kind of wonder about weakness policy with Charizard as a Pokemon that obviously has a lot of super effective weaknesses, which is maybe a prerequisite for weakness policy, but whether or not it's actually going to be able to take some of those attacks, well, that's what Grimmsnarl is there for, is you can throw screens up to allow it to take some of those attacks as well. So a really cool tech. I think I texted Jake about this at some point, where I was only really able to kind of like pop in and out of Worlds and catch the Twitch stream as possible, but I saw weakness policy Charizard and I was like, oh my god, that's the coolest thing I have ever seen. So we're going to get to presumably feature one here in this match. I don't know how much information we give away here, Jake. But anyway, I think just about ready to get into the match here. We've given just about enough context. And into round 7 of Worlds Day 2 we go with 2 shiny restricteds on one side of the field and the Sun lead on the other side of the field. And this is bringing back, for me, Jake, 2016 quite a bit, where there was a lot of value to having these slower weather setting restricted.
Yeah, that's paying off nicely for Naoto here. I think, generally speaking, Kyogres are run a little bit faster, and Groudons are not running most speed at all, if any. So I think it's a pretty safe lead in this case, especially if you expect the Kyogre, but there's not a good chance that Rain goes up the end of this turn, just because Groudons typically are slow, especially given that Trick Room's a big option here.
All right, we're going to jump right into multiple Dynamax Pokemon here, which is not something we've featured on Future Sight just yet, because it's not really all that much of a look back. This was like last week, so we're jumping right into it here, where Charizard is going to be the Gigantamax of choice. It's going to take a Behemoth Blade, which is still a lot of damage, which is why Zacian is such a ridiculous Pokemon. It's going to fire back with an Airstream, but Kyogre is going to get the opportunity to go ahead and fire off a Geyser immediately after taking this Precipice Blades, and you can see that players here, I feel like at this point, especially in the World Championships, Jake, players are very comfortable with what kind of trades they want to make, and especially strong offensive trades, which is what happened here, is Shohei was like, you know what, a Behemoth Blade is fine so long as I get the damage off on Charizard, which is really the primary target here at this point in the game.
Yeah, I think that's an okay trade just because you don't necessarily need Zacian for the rest of this matchup. Assuming that Gastrodon's in the back, you have Rillaboom to cover that very well. If you get a bunch of damage off on the Charizard, obviously you can't knock it out yet just because they are running so much bulk, but you are able to pretty easily chip it down low, and that allows you to kind of let Kyogre reign for the rest of the game here.
Yeah, and I think based on the way that Shohei played that turn, you also wonder whether or not there are certain calculations in which he actually gets the knockout on Charizard there with a Behemoth Blade followed by a Max Geyser. And you also, based on the way that turn 2 goes, kind of tip your cap as being able to make an offensive play like that with Gastrodon sitting in the back. Yeah,
Max Strike is a really cool option on Kyogre. A lot of them are running Hyper Beam with Assault Vest, and I think Thunder and 2 water moves is typically what they use. I hate that. That was so disgusting.
That's the most ridiculous calc you could possibly dream
I know.
You're
+2 G-Max Charizard in the sun, G-Max Wildfire, just one-hit KO against Incineroar.
But it's a little cathartic,
Disgusting.
right? After years of Incineroar dominating VGC formats, it feels a little good until you see it multiple times, in which case you're like, that's not right anymore.
Yeah. Oh, man. As soon as that happened live, I was horrified. I'm gonna pause it here for a sec, just because that was a huge knockout for Naoto, but if you kind of look at what he has left, there's a Groudon and a Gastrodon, both of which are very, very scared of this Rillaboom.
Rillaboom says hello.
Yeah, and presumably Incineroar or Lunala. I think if you had Grinsnarl, he would have brought it out already. Incineroar is not going to like the Kyogre, and Lunala is going to be kind of neutral into them at this point. But without a great way to deal with this Rillaboom, because the Kyogre's water moves are all spread, you can't just Storm Drain them away, and you're going to drop to a classic Grassy Glide. Even though he just took a big knockout and Shohei is at a Pokemon disadvantage, I actually think he's in the much better spot here.
Yeah, and I think this is kind of one of those situations where you look at a lot of the back and forth that happens between, we talk about positive and negative matchups, but there are some that are more conditional and fall into the gray area, right? Where, if Groudon is one of the Pokemon that's threatening to knock out Rillaboom with the Heat Crash, but it has to take a Grassy Glide in order to do it. So those sorts of kind of back and forth matchups where it depends on what the partner Pokemon that's on the field is, and what's in the back. Incineroar is one of the things that very heavily influences who's able to get the matchup in this case. Is going to be a big factor going down the stretch here, especially here in Game 1.
I'll even let you in on a secret. This Groudon doesn't even have
love
a
secrets.
fire move.
What? Okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah. You'll see in a few turns, but it's bulk up, and it's got Rock Tomb.
Oh, that's so cool. What? I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah, it's bulk up, Rock Tomb, Precipice Blades, Protect.
Love
it's a cool
that.
set. Yeah. Just doesn't come in very handy here.
Right. And we're going to see Rillaboom try to protect itself. And this is one of the interesting interactions, I think, between Kyogre and the Rinya Sun variants, is that you can spread move and hit hit Gastrodon's partner, but you have to trade it a Storm Drain boost in order to do it.
Okay, it does have Heat Crash. Does it not have Protect then?
Wow, you lied to me.
I could have sworn it was Protect. I definitely saw Blades Rock Tomb bulk up. Anyway.
So it's instead of Protect. I guess that makes sense.
Yeah. I think here, Water Spout is totally fine. You don't care about Gastrodon getting special attack
with Rillaboom being the partner, yeah.
Exactly. I think even if Grassy Terrain goes down, it probably just gets knocked out by a Grassy Glide anyway.
Right.
And if at any point Rillaboom is able to connect one Grassy Glide, like the Gastrodon's gone. So these special attack boosts are irrelevant, which allows Kyogre to just fire off these spread water moves without really caring.
I think it's interesting that the Gastrodon's never picked up. I feel like Rindoberry is a big late format Gastrodon item, like historically is. You wonder what the thought process is, that it takes multiple months for players to be like, wait a minute, what if we took away Gastrodon's one weakness? But in restricted formats, Gastrodon actually fears the neutral damage from some of these restricted Pokemon far more than it fears, niche grass type damage, which is basically Rillaboom and nothing else at this point. The odd Kartana or like Grass Move Whimsicott, like you mentioned earlier, Jake. But it taking a Precipice Blades or taking a Wild Charge, or not Wild Charge, Play Rough are far more impactful or like relevant damage calculations to its longevity as opposed to the Grass Moves, which it stays away from even when it does have Rindoberry.
Yeah, I think in like 2017 people were considering Rindo, but I'm pretty sure Kartana just knocked it out through Rindoberry anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, with the boosting item, as I recall.
So I mean, this is pretty sealed up. The Groudon being able to Heat Crash the Rillaboom, that was pretty much the one win condition for Naoto. Like if that happens, you're gonna win because you have Gastrodon into Kyogre, and that's pretty free. I think Naoto, knowing that he has like Jumax Wildfire turns left to tick, managing that very well, like making sure that the Rillaboom takes a couple of those before you start trying to fire off Heat Crashes. I don't know if Heat Crash, I actually don't know how much that does, but at a certain point, if you're taking Wildfire, you're probably getting knocked into range.
Right, yeah. Heat Crash, Fire moves on Groudon in particular are one of those things that I never really have a good idea of what the calcs are, because in my head it's a Fire type when it actually so that's a little difficult, but it's one of those situations where I think I kind of brought it up where both these Pokemon like have the ability to deal huge damage to each other, but it's just a matter of like positioning your board where you actually get to do it. And here Groudon with the Heat Crash wins out over the Grassy Glide influence. So we're here kind of jumping into game 2, and this is one of the situations that I think is super interesting in any Pokemon set where a match goes one way and both players still lead with the same leads. And I think there are a lot of interesting things about it from both players' sides where you think like, okay, you won, going back to the same leads definitely makes sense, but it's assuming no lead adjustment from your opponent, and then on the flip side, your opponent is leading the same Pokemon into the matchup that they just lost. So there's a lot of kind of interesting mind games at play, and you know that these players that they're in round 7 of the world championships have an idea of how they want to play into these archetypes, especially as we've talked about, these are like pretty common Pokemon archetypes, so seeing this kind of like repeat lead makes the game like that much more interesting.
And the thing with this matchup specifically too, or these leads rather specifically too, is that it's pretty dynamic what you can do if you're either player. Like we saw that the Zacian and Kyogre were the two faster Pokemon. And so if you're the Kyogre, you can go for Max Geyser, get the Rain Up. You can go for Max Lightning. I don't know if Behemoth Blade plus Lightning does more damage than Geyser would in the Sun. I want to say it would. You could even Max Strike right off the bat. I think that's a good way to counteract what's a pretty likely Airstream from the Charizard. And that specifically is just talking about how Shohei can handle the Charizard, leaving the Groudon out. Right. The Groudon's like the less impactful of the two on turn 1, but it still threatens Zacian with Precipice Blades, some damage on Kyogre with Blades. And so there's a lot that can happen this turn that I imagine both Shohei and Naoto are taking all of that into consideration. Specifically Shohei saying, I know I lost the game with these leads, but I have other options. Let's see what I can do with it.
Right, and I think to me at least the most foremost one is bringing in Gastrodon on turn 1. Is a pretty obvious sponge for those the Max Geyser that came out in turn 1 in game 1. Anyway, let's see what happens. Jake's gonna press play. I think one of the immediate separators here is which trainer has shiny Pokemon and which doesn't. I always think I think sometimes about this, Jake, about how there used to be a whole discourse about how back when the timer was in play, that there was actually a legitimate advantage to having shiny Pokemon because it ticks a couple seconds away on the timer. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. As there's going to be an adjustment from Shohei here on turn 1, as he's going to switch in Incineroar, but still elect to Dynamax his Kyogre. But we see here immediately on turn 1 that there's no Gastrodon switch in, which to me was the most compelling adjustment from Naoto.
Yeah, I think that's definitely something that's kind of low risk on this first turn. Mm-hmm. Like if you switch in Gastrodon here, maybe it takes a Behemoth Blade. I guess you don't really want that because it's still going to hurt, but that's like worst case scenario.
Yeah, and Blast Burn, oh my god, it still
I know.
does so much damage.
I know.
There's the Max Strike adjustment, which Jake was kind of talking about over the first 2 games here, as it's going to be able to drop the speed of both Pokemon, which is kind of like a natural answer to what would be an Airstream from Charizard. And I think here is where we kind of reach peak Pokemon aesthetically as far as storylines go, where Dynamax, Groudon, and Dynamax Kyogre are staring each other down. And if you've ever played Emerald version, right around now is the time that Rayquaza would ascend from the heavens and say, both of you go back to bed. I've had enough.
I think this is such a good turn for Shohei, though.
It's so good.
Naoto was trying to get cute, and like Charizard's not going to get knocked out by just a Behemoth Blade.
Right.
And it honestly might even be knocked into Solar Power range, which would have been even better. But you assume that Shohei makes the same turn 1 play. You eat the Behemoth Blade, you knock out the Zacian immediately with Blast Burn. But now instead you have your Groudon that's going to be max Quaking. And I don't dislike the idea, but I think that G-Max Charizard just gives you so much in any kind of matchup that Max Groudon just can't. And so I don't know that this was a super great idea.
Yeah.
I'm not going to call it a bad idea because obviously they're in this spot and I'm not. But
right.
Especially combined with the Max Strike, I think this turn just puts Shohei in such a commanding spot because you take way less damage than you could have given that first turn with the Incineroar eating the Max Quake or the Blast Burn. And the Max Strike I think was really smart because now your Incineroar is probably faster than the Groudon, just parting shot out. You ensure that if there's an Airstream, your Kyogre is still going to be faster. Max Strike there just covers so many options that I think it was a really smart move.
Yeah, and I think when you kind of take the way that turn 1 and I guess here turn 2 as well, and then kind of related to the late game, is that you're kind of thinking about how Naoto's offense is like almost entirely gone. Is that he's kind of relegated to either generating offense using Groudon, where it has to compete in its non-Dynamax form using Precipice Blades into grassy terrain, or basically being at -1 at all times because Incineroar is just constantly going to be in its face. As you wonder where the offense comes from, and it's basically like the offense is coming from Shohei like playing slow enough to allow Lunala into a position to really be like the primary offensive focal point for his team. So I think you're right, is that like there's just so much momentum generated by Shohei here that you wonder how Naoto comes back from it.
Yeah, it's just difficult because if you just compare damage being dealt by the Dynamax Pokemon, the Kyogre's taken a knockout into a non-G-Max Charizard is not super significant, but your Groudon's done less than half to Kyogre with 2 Max Quakes because you've been at -1 and -2 when they happened, and you're just really getting nothing out of this Groudon. There was a running joke on the analyst couch that if you Dynamax your Groudon, you lose. And like I think on a lot of the stream matches, that was what was happening. Anytime someone Dynamaxed their Groudon, they would lose the game, and that it seems to be what's happening here. Like Naoto got so little out of that Dynamax.
Right, and you kind of can see it in a microcosm here. Obviously, the rain had just gone up, but you see how much damage the Max Flare just did to Rillaboom, and it makes you scratch your head a little bit.
I think, if you look at the options for what Naoto has in the back, if it's Gastrodon, the Rillaboom just single-handedly wins this game at this point.
Yep.
If it's Incineroar, sure, but Shohei still has Zacian and he can just swap out Kyogre just like that. And so this is, again, just a really strong spot for Shohei. This Groudon's now at -3. Lunella doesn't have its Meteor Beam boost yet. it's there's a lot of room for error here if you're Shohei, I would say.
Right. And Incineroar is going to be rudely greeted here, but at this point it's basically just a free switch back into Kyogre, which is going to get to reset the rain. And Rillaboom is basically going to be set up for success here with the rain up. We know that we just saw what a Max player didn't do to it, and then you kind of project that onto what a Heat Crash is going to be. And then we know that a Moongeist Beam is obviously going to be a heavy hitter, but not enough to really take it off the field at this point.
Yeah.
And then the final piece of the puzzle is that Zacian is still in the back. We just saw Rillaboom take away the Shadow Shield from Lunala, and it's going to be threatening knockouts with Behemoth Blade onto basically the whole world at this point.
Yeah. Groudon at -3 is going to be tickling Zacian and
it's just
Rillaboom,
like,
even with super effective.
It's like it's like barely a Pokemon at -1, let alone -3.
I mean, Naoto's saving grace here is that Lunala. It's at +1. It's going to be doing a lot with Moongeist Beam to either target, really. I don't think it one-hit KOs the Zacian, but I could be wrong there. With a Precipice Blades, it certainly will. But Assault Vest Kyogre is still not going to be taking a whole lot. And again, you have a whole other Pokemon in the back to make some decisions with. And
Right.
I think Shohei just calling this really well. He figured that you probably have to get rid of that Rillaboom. That's probably going to be number one, especially if Gastrodon's in the back again. And so calling that he wouldn't take a Moongeist Beam there. And that damage specifically, I think, just ends the game on Lunala.
Right, and yeah, at this point, and we've had a couple of matches that we've shown on Future Sight so far, is where we're kind of talking about how the conclusion of the match is basically like foregone at this point, and we're just waiting for the players to play it out. There are kind of some niche outs that each player has that's more reliant on like a misplay than anything else. The game's not really contestable unless you really kind of like chuck your switch into the crowd and like let somebody choose your moves for you.
It's so little. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, but that's pretty much where we're at, is that this has pretty much always been the case with Groudon, with the exception of when it did have its ability to Primal Revert, is that at -1 it just like doesn't really exist. And Incineroar is kind of like the greatest example of that, where you kind of like switch Incineroar into Groudon and don't really worry about it too much.
Right.
As you know that it's going to be able to take a -1 Precipice Blades, it's going to get the opportunity to take out next turn, and that you actually generate momentum by switching a Fire-type Pokemon into a super effective move. And that's kind of what Groudon has sort of been relegated to for most of its existence.
Yeah. I mean, seeing Gastrodon here, there's no way for Naoto to get Sun back up, so Heat Crash can do damage. The Groudon's locked in at -3 for the remainder of this game. This is just Rillaboom's game to lose. That's... Never mind. Zacian's game to win.
No longer is Rillaboom's game anymore. Zacian's going to take a play rough knockout. And I guess that was maybe kind of one of those like small situational outs, is like, okay, maybe play rough can miss.
Right.
But I mean, even if it had, with Rillaboom in the back, there's not really an out.
Maybe Naoto targets himself with Grassy Glide. Or Shohei targets himself with Grassy Glide.
not even his partner Pokemon. He actually targets himself with
right.
like an old school Yu-Gi-Oh.
You just see Shohei fall off his chair. Oh, what happened?
He took a direct hit to his life points. But yeah, so this game's over at this point. Groudon is effectively incapable of accomplishing anything, and it has been for quite a while at this point. So we're looking forward to Game 3 at this point, where we've seen that both players have kind of shown what their preferred lead is. As we know that, as actually there's the bulk up reveal, which is what you kind of mentioned, Jake. Which calls into question whether or not that's a smart idea as far as information goes, or if we kind of just assume that Shohei knows. Both players at this point are kind of looking towards Game 3. We know what both players are kind of preferring as their lead, and then we kind of know what their primary plan is and their backup plan is, and now we're kind of looking into whether or not they're going to tap into both of those two plans that we kind of have an idea of, or if it's really kind of the third stringers that are going to get the opportunity to kind of like show what they could do. Yeah.
I'm now realizing that the Rock Tomb Groudon was a different person. That was Cassie.
Oh, Jake.
So, well, no, because we've seen all 4 moves now. We've seen Ground, Fire, Bulk Up, Protect. There were so many Groudons on stream. Give me a break.
That's true. There were a lot of Groudons on stream.
Naoto like trying to play to an out here. Like, I guess a max sleep on Zacian and a super low roll on Grassy Glide and a Heat Crash crit into a Precipice Blades crit could theoretically win you the game.
Sure.
So I respect the attempt, but
sure.
I'm with you in that I don't know that revealing bulk up there was wise. Unless he knew for certain that Shohei already knew that bulk up was there, which is a distinct possibility this late in the tournament, and given that they're countrymen. But either way, it just seemed like maybe not the best idea to reveal it, especially because your win con was still crits, which bulking up from -3 to -2 wouldn't change anyway.
Yeah, it definitely wouldn't. Yep, and I guess, kind of like you said, we can sort of debate the merits of that based on what the projected amount of information that's available to both players is. But I think that especially into like these teams where Kyogre is obviously an influential opponent to Groudon, is that you wonder whether or not bulk up like is really the first or second or third or fourth or fifth, sixth choice as far as like what your game plan is going to be as far as approaching this matchup. Anyway, so getting into game 3 here, we talked a little bit about it going into game 2, and both players are actually going to lead back into the same exact 2 Pokemon for the 3rd time in a row. And we discussed it a little bit, but this is really one of those situations where I think that it is super interesting to see repeat leads from high-level players, is that they have this like plan in mind, and this backup plan and this tertiary plan, where they kind of have an idea of like what the game plan from their opponent is. And this is like one of the most compelling situations, especially going into a game 3, that I personally can think of as far as like a VGC match.
Yeah, even if you eliminate, let's say you're Naoto and you eliminate matchup entirely, Groudon Charizard is such a strong lead that like it immediately demands attention from into both slots, really. And so even if you aren't sure what your game plan is going to be like 3, 4, 5 turns down the road, leading these two is hard to go wrong, especially if you're knowing that like you're seeing that Shohei's led the same thing. You know that you have the weather advantage off the bat. You know that you won game 1 pretty convincingly with this lead, and so you know that that's a possibility. Like you can win given this lead. I don't see a huge reason to deviate, right? Like, if you're more careful with your play, something like a turn 1 from game 2 is probably a worst case scenario. That was pretty disastrous.
Yeah.
But you also have so many better options, like so many better possible outcomes, what I meant. Yeah.
And I think the one thing that kind of sticks out to me as a reason to deviate is that you do wonder whether or not the double up that happened in game 1, where a Behemoth Blade plus a Max Geyser into Charizard brought it down to, I believe, 48 HP in its Gigantamax form, is you wonder whether or not that's a roll.
Right.
At least that's something that I'm thinking about. And I know you were talking about, Jake, how these Charizards are running max HP, or like 244 EVs or 236
like
EVs, but 48 HP is enough where if you get double rolls on both of the attacks, that depending on how it's trained, there's a possibility that it could be knocked out by that.
Yeah, definitely.
That's kind of the one thing, right? Otherwise, like Groudon Charizard until the day you die. That's part of the reason that you run this team, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, let's throw it and see what these two players do. We kind of have an idea of what a best case scenario for both players looks like at this point. We saw Naoto kind of take the advantage in game 1, and then Shohei take the advantage in game 2 with the Max Strike adaptation, which I think is really cool. Assault Vest Kyogre, like, as somebody that was kind of forged in primitive, I guess primitive is a word for it, primitive restricted formats, like Assault Vest Kyogre seems pretty backwards to me.
Anything other than Blue Orb seems backwards to me still.
Right?
I know that's not even a possibility
or
these
Choice
days,
Scarf. Choice Scarf as well.
Okay, sure. that is also backwards, but less backwards, maybe.
Right.
Or
so
more.
we're going to see the game 2 adjustment from Shohei, where Incineroar is going to be the switch in for the Zacian slot, which means that presumably Kyogre is going to be the Dynamax target. Charizard's going to do it first, which is even a different kind of set of circumstances than what played out in game 2. So we're going to see Charizard and Kyogre here be the Dynamax target, but instead of the way that it went in game 1, Zacian is gone, and it's going to be Charizard or Incineroar that switches into the G-Max Wildfire, and it's going to take a bazillion damage from it, which I still can't really get over.
That's just nasty.
Yeah,
that should be illegal.
Okay. Not okay.
That, I think, is a big knockout, though. Like, getting the Incineroar out of the way really quickly means that the Groudon is going to be less useless throughout the rest of the game.
Right.
Like, it's at -1 now, but you have plenty of decent switch options on this team, especially if the Gastrodon's in the back. The whole thing is that Gastrodon doesn't actually have to come to this matchup, I think, because you have Charizard that can Airstream it. I don't know. Like, yes and also no, because Kyogre's not doing a whole lot of damage. Like, in games 1 and 2, Kyogre was really not a primary source of damage for Shohei. And that's because the sun was up pretty much every time it was attacking. So you're not super scared of those geysers. So if you think you can deal with the Kyogre without the Gastrodon, I think Lunala and Incineroar serve you really well in general in this matchup. So I understand why you would leave the Gastrodon at home. That is... like, spoiler, that's what happens here, and Naoto gets kind of punished for it because you lose the Groudon here, which does kind of suck. Now you are locked into rain for the rest of the game. Your Charizard's at -1 speed, so you just kind of lost your Dynamax, your Gigantamax. You got the Wildfire, which is good, but kind of rough, I would say.
Yeah, definitely rough. I think that's a pretty insane turn from Shohei, actually, is to call a Max Guard from the Charizard and double up into Groudon, which is, like, already an interesting call to make, right? Because we're at the point where Groudon's at -1. We don't really respect it anymore. That's pretty much all that it takes. And you are able to call the Max Guard from Charizard, where it has so many influential things that it can do, where, like, it can Airstream, right, which is kind of the thing that it's most known for. It can Rock Fall as well, which is basically your only way back out of the rain.
Yeah.
And instead, you're just gonna leave Groudon open, and it definitely pays for it. And then immediately the following turn, Charizard is gonna pay for what happened the turn before.
Yeah, and the Max Strike coming in handy there because the Charizard just doesn't get another chance to fire off a Wildfire, possibly an Airstream. This is, I would say, a pretty great spot for Shohei just because you're still locked in the rain. You're about to see Naoto's 4th Pokemon is going to be the Incineroar, which in theory should be very good for you, right? Like, you have Kyogre Zacian against Lunala Incineroar with a 4th in the back, presumably the Rillaboom. And getting the Pokemon advantage, and specifically getting down to 2 left, it always feels very nice when you're that player that, you know, has more Pokemon left and you get them down to your final 2, so you just...
It sure does.
Well, okay, sure, but, like, in this case, you no longer have to worry about weather wars. Like, I don't,
right.
Obviously that's...
No, I know.
I have more Pokemon. Like, it's more than that here.
Definitely.
It just feels like a stronger spot, especially given the rain means that Zacian's not going to take much damage either.
And I think specifically the lack of Gastrodon is another thing that makes you feel pretty good about which Pokemon, not only how many Pokemon you have, but which Pokemon you have, right? Is that you see Rillaboom come in here, and Rillaboom's able to pretty safely kind of like switch into this position because it knows that it doesn't have anything to do anymore. It sees the 2 kind of final remaining Pokemon. Its main role at this point in the game would basically be to remove Shadow Shield, and with Gastrodon not being one of the Pokemon that comes out, it's kind of like, you know, it's just kind of a superfluous Pokemon, and getting to switch out Kyogre and potentially bring it back in later is like maybe the main value of switching Rillaboom in here.
Yeah. Wildfire coming in pretty handy, though. This Rillaboom is going to get knocked out by pretty much anything, especially Flare Blitz in the rain. That Meteor Beam does a lot of damage.
More than I thought.
Yeah, my mental calculator for that attack is not very good because I haven't experienced it that often. But I guess with Rillaboom running Protect pretty often, they're no longer Assault Vest, which was always the go-to item on Rillaboom.
Yep.
So you're taking a whole lot of damage from that Meteor Beam, which means that Rillaboom, not as important now that Gastrodon's not on the field, but I think still having Rillaboom as an option to Grassy Glide or Lunala if you need to, still could come in handy here, and having that pretty low isn't super great for Shohei.
Right, but we do know that Kyogre is still in the back, and the fact that it does carry, we kind of know that they're carrying Assault Vest at this point is something that helps the Lunala matchup quite a bit. Which, as I don't know if we mentioned in the past, but it was almost reversed because Psyshock was such like a good way of dealing damage to Kyogre in the past. But it's almost kind of like the shoe is on the other foot at this point. And then all these kind of conversations that we're having are with ignorance of the fact that Zacian was still sitting on the field that turn and is able to do kind of a million damage whenever it's given the opportunity to do so. But finally we get to see Kyogre retake the field. We know that it has multiple options of dealing spread damage, so whether or not it's going to be Origin Pulse, which I think it is kind of forced to use at this point, right? That we know that it's going to have to take damage before it attacks, so Water Spout is out. And it's going to rely on dealing damage that way, as well as notoriously the accuracy of that move.
And again, here I think you're still pretty happy if you're Shohei. I think Incineroar is not going to do a whole lot of damage. They're almost never running any attack investment. And you are Assault Vest, which will help you deal with the Lunala. I believe there's one more turn of Trick Room, and maybe two. This is the last turn of Trick Room.
I want to say it's the last one. Yeah.
And so you're gonna have to take both an attack from Incineroar and Lunala this turn. That's not really questionable because it's Assault Vest. You have no way to stop that. But in theory, you should be able to eat those. Fire off an Origin Pulse. Yeah, you can Origin Pulse, knock out the Incineroar, probably bring Lunala down pretty low, if not knock it out too, and then Thunder to win just for the accuracy, something like that. And so this is still a pretty decent spot for Shohei, even though it might look a little bit dire by now. But we're not done. We're not done here.
We're not done. And I think one of the things that is always kind of important to think about is that when you are the person that's attacking second, you're subject to far more RNG than if you're attacking first.
Yep.
And instead, we're not even going to call that into consideration here, as we're just going to go ahead and reveal the Lunala tech.
Yeah, so...
Reveal!
I think Naoto had a chance to use Wide Guard in Game 2, if I'm not mistaken. That might have bought him another turn or two. But that was well hidden. Again, it's impossible to know what these players knew going in, but if Wide Guard was not something that Shohei knew that Lunala had, that just entirely flipped this game. Because now, since your Kyogre's water moves are Water Spout and Origin Pulse, you have no good way to hit this Incineroar. Like, not a single one. You have Hyper Beam and you have Thunder, neither of which are going to do a whole lot. And Wide Guard buys you so much time. I like these repeated parting shots here, just because you're getting Kyogre low. You're reducing that damage from the Thunder or Hyper Beam or the water moves if you don't call a Wide Guard. But I just think that Wide Guard really flips this matchup. And it's not like it's over yet either. Like, there's still a lot that can go wrong for both players, especially given that immediate Thunder paralysis. But just really, really smart from Naoto there, knowing that this is a possible endgame that could happen.
And this is one of the most interesting endgames that you could immediately dream up, as he goes for a Water Spout knowing that Wide Guard is sitting there. And that's kind of one of the interesting things. And what makes me think about, or one of the things that kind of evokes is there have been some formats in the past where you're kind of fighting against Sucker Punch PP, where it has APP, and you have to decide whether or not this person is going to go for all 8 Sucker Punches, or if they're going to pause, or like when the right time to attack is. And that's kind of that situation there where Shohei kind of correctly identifies that this isn't going to be a Wide Guard. It's more important that Trick Room go back up, and then we're going to go immediately back into Wide Guard. So being conscious of both PP for multiple moves, whether it be Water Spout or Wide Guard, is one of the things that's factoring into this end game. And then all of a sudden we get this extra variable where the burn is lodged by a Flare Blitz from Incineroar, which otherwise really has no business being on the field at all right now.
That's such a big burn too, just because if you're Flare Blitzing a Kyogre in the rain, you don't have a dark move. Like, you're not running Dark Accelerate or Throat Chop. We don't know what the fourth move on Incineroar is, but you're doing very negligible damage to the Kyogre with this Incineroar. But the burn is going to be so helpful in getting Kyogre into range for a Moongeist Beam. Like, a turn or two ago, maybe Moongeist Beam and Flare Blitz knocked it out, but Naoto, super, super smart, knowing that he had another turn or two to buy with Wide Guard, presuming he doesn't get paralyzed, mind you. Like, he still has to fight through the paralysis there. And he has to make sure that he's clicking Moongeist Beam at the exact right time. Because if you Moongeist Beam and Flare Blitz and the Kyogre doesn't get knocked out and Origin Pulses you, you get double knocked out and you lose. Like, that is the worst case scenario here. And knowing when to pull that trigger is what won in this game.
Super important, and he nails it, obviously, where he goes for the Moongeist Beam. And I'm going to be honest, I have no idea what that calc is. With Assault Vest Kyogre, knowing that it has, what is it, base 120 20 special
High.
defense.
It's
or
base
something
high.
Base a lot of special defense, and he nails it. Especially seeing the wide guard makes me think that maybe it's not even max special attack investment. Where we know that it's power herb, so it can boost itself, so you can kind of like make some allowances as far as like where your EVs go, whether or not that it's best to put it into special attack. And he just knows the calc, and I think that's one of the more important things as far as like preparation here at the World Championships go, where you know kind of like what you're going to be seeing, what the common archetypes are, what kind of spreads they're going to be running, and he is spot on, where I'd be willing to bet that that is like within, 5 or 10 HP of what the actual calculation for landing the Moongeist Beam is. And it has to be at that time as well, because then you're going up against Trick Room turns.
Yep.
If you run out of Trick Room and you're subjected to taking, a Water Spout or an Origin Pulse from that Kyogre if you let your guard down for a minute, there are so many kind of like variables that could possibly happen as a result of EV training, PP, Trick Room turns, weather
paralysis.
turns. I think we'd pass out on weather turns, right? Like chip damage from the Flare Blitz burn. So there are just so many different things that sort of encapsulates what VGC is here. And to see somebody like be on top of all of those different factors, and we talk about mitigating risk, it's like a perfect mitigation of risk to know exactly what the right time, like Jake said, is to pull the trigger on the Moongeist Beam, and he nails it.
Yeah. That was so fun to watch in person. I cannot overstate that. The entire stadium arena, there was like really cool like stadium seating in the venue. Different story. But like everyone sitting in those stadium seats was going wild this entire match, just because it was so good. It was such a good like back and forth set between two of the best players in the world, undoubtedly. And it was a treat to get to watch live. So I'm glad that we got to talk about it here too.
Yeah, definitely a really great match to watch, and I got to catch a couple turns of it, but I was busy doing things outside of London, so I didn't actually get to watch the whole thing. But happy to talk about the entirety of it here on Future Sight. So here we are. We're planning to be back in 2 weeks here. Which will coincide with, now that Jake's vacation is done, my vacation will be done by the time we're ready to launch another episode. So as always, if you have any matches, whether or not you want us to talk about the 2022 World Championship again, if you were more invested in some of the older formats, we're happy to talk about 2013, 2014, 2015, 16, 17, 18, 19, but 22, sure, we're back in. We're happy to talk about any of those formats, so you can hit us up on social media. We have Twitters, we have the YouTube comments. A lot of you hopefully have us in direct messages as well. So if you have anything that you'd like to see us talk about, by all means, find us on one of those platforms.
I would happily kick you out and just do 18 myself too.
That's fine. You can
if
do
we
that.
want to.
By all means.
Comment below if you want me to kick Brendan off Soundproof.
I'd appreciate the interaction more than I would be offended by the sentiment, I think. So anyway, our plan is to be back in 2 weeks. We'll figure out something on our own, but of course we always appreciate our feedback, and it was pretty exciting to get to bring something from the 2022 World Championships for a number of different reasons. Jake was there. We're back after, 2 years or 3 years almost as far as World Championship go. And now we've got to look forward to the upcoming, what I'll call as like the kind of secondary World Championships is San Diego Regionals, where all the cool kids will be. So if you're not there, then we won't be able to get to talk about this until the 2023.
Don't forget Arlington, which is a month before, and definitely has VGC. Trust me, you should come. And
definitely has the same tourist people, right?
Totally. You get to see the Cowboys Stadium from outside.
So anyway, hopefully we'll be seeing you guys in 2 weeks. Thanks for stopping by. We're happy to be with you again. And we'll see you again at that time. Have a great 2 weeks.